In our last video, I think this is 6B. Whoops. There we go. In the last video, we looked at a piece by Milton Babbitt that was used integral serialism. And one of the complexities we looked at was how we had all this like row of attack points with the rhythm, and up to 16 different combinations of where all these 16th note attack points could be, and how you could invert it, how you could do it backwards. You could like transpose it by starting on the next measure or the next beat of rhythms, that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, there was this incredible amount of hyper control where the composer took every single aspect of the music and had to have like a very, very tight control over what was happening. Every decision was made, everything was related to something else. Now we're going to be looking at phase music, and there's a couple of things that I want you to be thinking of as we are looking at phase music. One is the idea of minimalism. And the idea behind minimalism is it's when there is an artwork that uses very sparse amounts of materials. So if we were to think of that in terms of music, maybe a song that's written that it only plays like a few pitches, and it only just uses those pitches over and over. It doesn't use like all the different pitches available, just a very minimalist amount. Or maybe the rhythm is minimalist. Maybe it only has one or two specific rhythmic patterns, and it doesn't try lots of different rhythmic patterns. It only does one or two things. Or maybe the register, or maybe the dynamics, right? Maybe the dynamic doesn't change, it just stays one dynamic. And maybe the register, it doesn't get really high and really low in the music, it just stays in one spot. So there's lots of ways, or harmony. Perhaps it just focuses on a few like harmonies, and it doesn't explore a lot of different harmonies. So there's a lot of ways that music can be minimalist. Another thing that we learned about was aleatory or indeterminate music. And the idea is, what are composers, or who are composers, or what parameters can be left to chance? And one of those composers that you read about was John Cage, how he took a lot of his ideas, but rather than say, oh, it needs to be played on this instrument, or it needs to be this tempo, instead leaving it up to the performer to make those decisions. So as we look at phase music, we're going to see more use of minimalism, and we're going to see more use of leaving some of the objectives in the music, or the parameters in the music, up to the performer, leaving it up to chance, leaving it to the performer, using sparse materials. Now the first piece that I want you to listen to doesn't have a score. It's a loop tape piece called Come Out. And you're going to listen to this, and you won't need to listen to the entire thing, but you'll need to listen to a few minutes of it to get the concept. There is a man's voice speaking, and he has sort of two tracks of that voice. One is just a tiny bit faster than the other. And so at the beginning, because one is just only a tiny bit faster, it just sounds like one track, like they're playing together. But slowly one of them speeds up, and you start to kind of hear an echo, and it just sort of emerges like this echo because it just slowly comes out. One is faster. And it starts with maybe more of a reverberation before it becomes like an echo, and then you can hear it, you can hear the two like sort of like phasing against each other, right? One slowly sort of emerges. The other thing that you'll notice when you listen to it is you'll start hearing rhythm and pitches in the man's voice. So when he's saying, come out to show them, you'll start to feel like it's in a rhythm. Come out to show them, come out to show them, come out to show them. You'll start hearing a rhythm that you don't normally hear when you hear just someone talking. You don't hear people talk in a rhythm. But by looping it and sort of phasing one out of the other, you start hearing that rhythm. You'll also hear pitches in the man's voice. Again, we don't really think of someone speaking as having pitch, but when you hear come out to show them, come out to show them, come, you actually start hearing pitches when it gets looped. So hearing the human voice takes on a whole other meaning, and in this phase piece. So this tape loop, this phase piece, it's also important to understand that this that come out was very much based on a lot of injustice and social upheaval of the times in the 60s, and hearing sort of that inspiration, I think, also adds context and an understanding to this music. Now, we're going to look at a loop phase piece that is for performers. We're going to have one piano playing in one tempo, and then a second piano will play the identical thing, but just slowly get faster until they start phasing apart. Now, it sounds crazy, right? I mean, that's like the idea that one person is like maybe at quarter note equals 100 and the other person's at quarter note equals 101 and they slowly drift apart. I mean, that's going to be like impossible to perform, you would think. So let's look at the piece. So this is on page 198, piano phase. And you'll notice that it was also written so it could be played on two marimbas. And so first of all, let's look at the score. It looks kind of unusual because it has all these repeats and things like that. But I do want to point out a few things. So first of all, how many pitches are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This piece only uses 5 pitches through the whole thing. That would definitely be an example of minimalism. When you write a musical work, but you only use 5 notes, right? You're not, and only those 5. None of the bass notes, none of the high treble notes, just those 5. Very minimalist. What about the rhythms? Only 16th notes. No quarters, no eighths, no rests, nothing like that. So very, very, very minimalist use of rhythm and pitch. You'll also notice that it's written mezzo forte, non legato, all the way through, with the exception of when this piano fades in, and then is also mezzo forte, non legato. So minimalist dynamic, mezzo forte, non legato all the way through, minimalist articulation. So the whole thing is just supposed to be this one sort of stagnant idea. Now, if you look at this, it's kind of hard to see, but this is play it 4 to 8 times. This is an example of leaving something up to the performer. This is an indeterminate or an aleatory feature. Check it out. Play it up to 4 to 8 times, and then this one, (12 to 18 times. And then here, it will repeat 4 to 16. Here, 16 to 24. So the exact number of repeats isn't something that is given. It's something that the performers will just feel in the performance. And when they feel like they've made it to the next spot, then they go to the next spot. And generally speaking, this one should take around 16 to 24 before they're ready to sort of feel the move to the next one. So this is an example of leaving something up to chance. Now, the way that it works, piano 1 comes in by themselves. Piano 2 comes in, fading in, so by the time that you hear Piano 2 at mezzo forte, it should just sound like one big piano, right? Because they're playing the exact same thing. Piano 1 holds the tempo, Piano 2 slightly accelerates until that pianist is 1/16th note ahead. And then suddenly the pattern will change. We'll hear E and F sharp, we'll hear F sharp and B, we'll hear B and C sharp. So just by having the first piano slowly speed up over the number of times, they'll suddenly lock in 1/16th note ahead. They'll stay locked in. Then Piano 2 will slowly speed up and then lock in 2/16th notes ahead. And then slowly speed up and lock in 3/16th notes ahead. You get the idea. Obviously, this is a very demanding work. How would you even go about practicing it? If you look on page 199, there is an entire page that explains how to play the piece, and not only how to play it, but how to practice it. Imagine that if you're playing a piece by Bach, and Bach had explained to you hey, this is how you should practice my music, right? They didn't do that. They just, they wrote the music, you figure it out. Because this is so difficult and demanding in such a crazy way, or at least a new way. If you look down here at rehearsal, it actually explains the best strategy for rehearsing this music. It turns out that the way you rehearse is you skip all the spots where you speed up and you just practice locking in. And locking in 1/16th note ahead, lock in 2/16th notes ahead, lock in 3, and then once you hear those places where you've locked in, then you practice the speed up part to get to the lock-in spots. That's essentially the rehearsal directions. You'll also see that this is how the two pianos should be positioned, with this one with the lid open, this one with no lid, or if it's played on two marimbas, then it would be done that way. So anyway, these directions for performance, you should go ahead and read them, and you should also read the rehearsal so you better understand. And then please listen to the piece, and you'll get in your Zen mode, right, as you're listening to it. Let's look at another phase piece. This is considered to be the first sort of minimalist work or phase, the first sort of work of its kind in C by Terry Riley. And you'll notice again that this has lots of performance instructions. Before we get to that though, let's look at the score. It's a very unusual score in the sense that it just has these figures, but it doesn't really have a connection from one to the next. I'm going to ask you to read through the performance indications, but I'm actually going to give you kind of a summary. It's a jam session. Everybody just shows up, you bring your instrument. If you play violin, you bring the violin. If you play horn, you bring your horn. Whatever. You just show up with your instrument. So that is one of the aleatory or indeterminate features of this piece is instrumentation. Instrumentation is left up to the performers. The number of people is who shows up. The instruments are what they brought. So it can be played on any instruments, any number of people. You probably need at least several people to make it work. It doesn't make sense with just one person. Then you'll have somebody that keeps a steady beat on the note C, and they'll pulse it, boom, 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 and they just keep that steady pulse. And then one by one, people sort of decide when they want to join in. And when you join in, you start with number 1. And you just keep playing figure 1 over and over and over. Keep playing it. And then other people will join in on figure 1. And then everyone kind of joins in. But then when you feel like it, you do number 2, and you move on to number 2. So some people are still on number 1, but then maybe this person moves to number 2. And then maybe another person moves to, like, who's on 2, maybe this person moves to 3, but then this person moves to 2. And then eventually, like, all the people come in on 1, and some are moving to 2, and now some are moving to 3. And now a lot more people are on 2, and now someone's moving to 4, right? So the idea is everyone's sort of moving at their own pace, going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 down the road. So another aspect, what's left to chance, is how many times you play each one of these. How long the whole concert's going to be, right? If people are in the zone and they don't want to leave, they're like having a good time on number 20, and they're just going to stay on number 20 for a long time, then it's going to be a long concert. When you read the directions, it suggests that since there are 53 figures, it could take a whole year, because you could do one figure a week and just play that one thing for a whole week. And then by the end of the year, you'll be down on 52 to 53, right? So the number of repetitions, the length, the instruments, all of that stuff is left to chance, left up to the performers. Now, what will be the overall effect if people start from the beginning and then slowly, one by one, they kind of move on to like a new one? The overall effect is that it will just slowly transform from figure 1. It will slowly transform along the way, because you'll start hearing certain, like people, you'll hear new notes emerge. When you get to number 6, like you'll start hearing people holding long notes. When you get to 16, 17, 18, you'll start hearing more fast notes, right? But because people are still like on different parts, it slowly kind of emerges. If you listen to a recording of this, you'll get the idea that it takes a long time for these musical figures to sort of transform from one to the other. I do want to point out a few performance instructions. So everybody plays from the same part, right? Everybody's going to have one of these. You play all 53 in sequence, so you don't skip any of them. You go through all of them. The pulse is traditionally played by a beautiful girl. Yeah, keep in mind this was written in 1964, so maybe she had go-go boots or something. On the top 2 octaves, keeping a strict time. Tempo should be determined by how fast the group can play the 16th notes. Everyone should stay in the same pulse. You know, so you'll be able to. It's okay to amplify. Like you'll see, there's a lot of stuff given there that will kind of point you in the right direction. What are aspects of this that are minimalist? Well, again, you'll notice that the tempo is just very constant. The tempo never changes, so that sort of solid tempo of minimalism. You'll notice that most of these notes are in the key of C, with a few exceptions. We do get a few F sharps. So when it gets to this section, it will start to have a C Lydian sound. And you'll see later on we get some B flats. When we get the B flats, it will start to have a C Mixolydian sound, but otherwise it's very, very much diatonic and uses a very specific amount of pitches. But just the sort of the constant repetition of just sort of these very, and also these ideas themselves are quite sparse, right? The fragments are they're pretty small fragments of music. It's not like these larger explorations. So the pitches, sort of the control of the pitches and the rhythms and the steadiness of it give it kind of a minimalist quality. All right. I think that's all I wanted to say about phase music, but I will have another video about your assignment.